Okay, children, so we meet again. Good morning again. So, we are going to continue about Al-Biruni's Kitabul Hind. Okay, I hope all of you are there. It's 10:40. Okay, so the next subtopic is Al-Biruni's description of the caste system. So, Al-Biruni was very much aware of the caste system in India, but as I told you earlier, he got all this information from the Brahmins as well as from Dharma Sutras, Dharma Shastras and Manusmriti. Okay, so his knowledge of caste system in India was a little bit different than what actually was practiced in India. See, you studied earlier when I taught you about Shatavahanas and all, they were different, isn't it? They did not follow the social norms set up at that time by the Brahmanas. Actually, Brahmanas wanted everyone to follow Manusmriti, Dharma Shastras and Dharma Sutras, but it was not like that. Many people did not follow that rigid form of caste system. Okay, but Al-Biruni was not aware of that because he got everything from the side of Brahmins and he read Dharma Shastras, Dharma Sutras and Manusmriti. Okay, and from Puranas, of course, then Bhagavad Gita. From all these books, he got his notions of caste system. Okay, so he tried to explain the caste system in India. See, you know how he wrote Kitabul Hind, isn't it? First a question, then description, then comparison. So he tried to understand the caste system in India by comparing it with other cultures. See, when you studied French Revolution, do you remember about the class system prevalent there? Or in medieval Europe, you know about the class system prevalent there, upper class and lower class. Whereas in India, it was caste system. Okay, so in India, if I talk to you about caste system, you know that Chaturvarna was there at that time, Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, Shudras, and of course, the lower strata, untouchables were there at that time. So, Al-Biruni tried to compare this with other cultures. See, in the last year, in +1, when we studied about Roman culture and all, we studied that there were also class system. It was divided into different strata, that is, clergy was the topmost, then lords were there, then poor peasants were there, middle class peasants were there, in between knights were there. Class system was there, isn't there? Clergy, lord, knights, poor peasants. 4 classes. Okay. Likewise, Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, Shudras. See, I am not comparing it with the class system of Europe, that of Indian caste system, but Al-Biruni tried to compare this with the class system prevalent in the other societies during that time. Okay, so he noted that in ancient Persia, 4 social categories were recognized, which are they? Knights and princes, monks, fire priests and lawyers, physicians, astronomers and other scientists, and finally peasants and artisans. So this is how he tried to integrate caste system with class system. Okay. So what was he trying to say? He was trying to say that caste system was not unique to India, but in other places also it was there. The name was different, but the same thing was there in other cultures also. But at the same time, he said that in Islam, it was not like that. There was no caste system or no class system was there. Only the how they pray to the God or was different in Islam. That is, he was specific to say that there was no class system or caste system In Islam, only the observance to the piety was different in Islam. Okay. So now the notion of pollution, that is, even though he accepted the caste system in India, he did not like the notion of pollution. What do you mean by that? See, I told you it was divided into 4, and at the lower strata untouchables were there, isn't it? They were not allowed to mingle with other people. See, this was the notion of pollution which was described by Al-Biruni. He believed that it is not correct. Okay. So he accepted the Brahmanical notions of caste system, but he did not accept the notion of pollution. He said that the sun cleanses the air, the salt in the sea cleanses the water. Likewise, so there should not be a notion of pollution there. Everyone should be equal. See, this is because Al-Biruni just heard the words of Brahmins and he just read the books which was written by the Brahmins. That is why, of course, these type of things were there in our society. But still, there were intermingling also, because these people from the lower strata, they used to work for the rich people, for the Brahmins, etc. So that the distinction which was described by Al-Biruni was not there at all. Did you understand what I am trying to say? Because the caste system was not as rigid as Al-Biruni described in Kitab al-Hind. Okay, there were intermingling between the lower caste and the higher caste. That is what I am trying to say. Okay. So, but Al-Biruni did not describe it like that. Because he read this Manusmriti and Dharmasastras, he believed that the distinction was clear, so he did not like the notion of pollution. That is why he said that in Islam it was not like that. There was no caste, there was no class, only the way they worshipped the God was different. Okay. So, did you understand what I am trying to say? See, Al-Biruni did not like the notion of pollution. He believed that like sun cleanses the air, like salt in the seawater cleanses the water, it should be like that in the society also. There should not be a distinction between higher caste and lower caste so much. Okay. Now, as I told you earlier, Al-Biruni's description of caste system was entirely influenced by the Brahmanical notions, which was not correct, because there were intermingling between the lower caste and upper caste. Not so much, but still the way Al-Biruni described was very rigid in his book. Okay, it was not that rigid during that time. Okay. We are talking about 11th century, don't mind that. Now, I am going to tell you about Hindu. I am not going to talk to you about the religion, but how the word Hindu came. Okay. The term Hindu was derived from an old Persian word used between 5th and 6th centuries BC to refer to the region east of the river Sindh. Sindhu river, you must have heard about it, isn't it? Indus Valley civilization, Indus, Sindhu. So the word Hindu derived from the word Indus or Sindhu. The Arabs continued the Persian usage and called this region Al-Hind. The people who lived in the region of Sindhu river that place were called Al-Hind, and the people who lived in that area were known as Hindi. Who called them Hindi? The Arabs and the Persians. Okay. Why did they call them Hindi? Because they were living near the river Sindh. Okay, so they were called Al-Hind, the place were called Al-Hind, and the people were called Hindi. Later, Turks refer the people east of the river Indus as Hindu. So who gave the people in India the name? It was the Arabs, Persians and the Turks. Why? Because we were living near the river Sindh. So the Turks, it was Turks who began to call the people who are living near the river Sindh Hindu, and their land as Hindustan. So who called the people of India for the first time Hindu? It was the Turks. One mark question. Okay. And who called India Hindustan for the first time? Turks. That is also a one mark question. Now, and the language they speak was known as Hindavi. None of these expressions indicated the religious identity of the people. See, that is what always we say, that Hinduism is not a religion. Okay. Why? Because how did we derive the name Hindu? From Turks. Turks describe the people who were living in the region of Indus as Hindu, and their language Hindavi. Okay. Now, only afterwards, only after centuries, this word came to be associated with a religion. Okay. At first we were Hindus only because we were living in that particular place. Did you understand? So that is all about Al-Biruni. Al-Biruni and Kitab-ul-Hind. So from Kitab-ul-Hind we can understand about the way in which he wrote the book. Then we can understand about the religious practices of the people, and then we can understand the social custom of the people. Okay. Now we are going to study about Ibn Battuta's Rihla. Okay, I told you that Ibn Battuta came from Morocco, isn't it? And he wrote a book named Rihla. So what is the meaning of Rihla? It is journey or travelogue. Either journey or travelogue. We can say journey or travelogue. Okay, it is an Arabic word. Rihla is an Arabic word. Ibn Battuta's Rihla. See, this is Ibn Battuta. Can you see this? He is traveling on a horseback, isn't it? I will show the map later. Now, Ibn Battuta, an early globe trotter. See, when I first introduced the class, I told you that lots of people travel, isn't it, for trading purposes, in order to preach their religion, for then some people travel just for the sake of traveling. That is what Ibn Battuta did. He was a very good traveler. He liked to travel to many places. I'll show the map later. Okay, he has traveled to so many places in his lifetime, just because he loves to travel. Just because he loves to travel. So his book of travels were known as, the name of the book is known as Rihla, meaning journey or travelogue. Okay. And in his book, mainly he wrote about the culture and society during that period. And I told you earlier that Ibn Battuta came to India in the 14th century. Okay, he came to India in the 14th century. So when he came to India, he was so surprised because everything was different from what he has experienced until that period. So he was so excited to travel throughout India. And he traveled to many places in India and writing all the way his memoirs, whatever he saw, he wrote it down so that he could compile it later. Okay. And if we are talking about Ibn Battuta, his family was a well-educated family, and he was a very good scholar. He studied lots of languages as well as different things, and he was a scholar in Sharia law. Okay, he was a scholar in Sharia. And not only that, he wrote lots of books apart from Rihla. Wherever he go, he wrote travelogues, and the book about India was known as Rihla. See, this Moroccan traveler was born in Tangier, in one of the most respected families in that particular area. I told you his family was well educated. All the members in his families, they were well educated, and so was Ibn Battuta. He also was a very good scholar, and he was very well versed in religious law or Sharia. So if we are talking about if I ask you to write a short note on Ibn Battuta, what all things you will write? He was from Morocco. He came to India in 14th century. He liked to travel. That is why he traveled to traveled to many places all over the world. Then he was a scholar. His family members were all scholars, and Ibn Battuta was also a scholar. Ibn Battuta was a Pandit he is very well versed in religious law, that is Sharia. Okay. Now, see, many of the people, even now we also think that if we read books, then we will get lots of information about places, isn't it? But Ibn Battuta was not like that. He wanted to experience the feelings of different places. He never believed that he could get all these things from the books. He always liked to travel and experience everything first hand. Okay, so because of that, he did not rely lot what is written in the books, but he liked to travel. And he just liked to explore new places, explore people, explore the culture, different cultures, etc. Okay, so before he set off to India in 1332, he came to India between 1332 and 1333. He made a pilgrimage trip to Mecca and had already traveled extensively in Syria, Iraq, Persia, Yemen, Oman, and a few trading ports on the coast of East Africa. So from this you can understand that he liked to travel extensively, isn't it? Before he came to India, he has traveled to many other places like Syria, Iraq, Persia, Yemen, Oman, etc. So how did he reach India? He traveled extensively through Central Asia, whereas Al-Biruni, he traveled in Southern Asia, isn't it? But Ibn Battuta, he traveled through Central Asia and reached Sindh in 1333. He reached Sindh in 1333. See, why did he come to India at that time? At that time, Muhammad bin Tughlaq was the Sultan in India, and he had heard so many things about Muhammad bin Tughlaq that he was attracted by his reputation. And as you know, Muhammad bin Tughlaq was a great patron of arts and letters. So once he entered India, he straight away went to Delhi, passing through Multan and Uch. Okay, so he immediately after he came to India, he set off towards Delhi. Why? Because he has heard lots about Muhammad bin Tughlaq and he was a patron of arts and letters. So Ibn Battuta wanted to meet Muhammad bin Tughlaq, so he straight away went to Delhi through Multan and Uch. Did you understand? Okay. Now when Ibn Battuta reached Delhi, the Sultan was very much impressed by the scholarship and appointed Ibn Battuta as his Qasi. Qasi means judge. Okay, as his Qasi in his court in Delhi. He remained as a Qasi in Delhi for many years. But after some time, after many years, he fell out of favor in the eyes of the Sultan, and he was thrown into prison. See, he went to Delhi so that he wanted to become an important person in the court of Muhammad bin Tughlaq. He reached Delhi. Muhammad bin Tughlaq was very much appreciated by the knowledge of Ibn Battuta. So he made Ibn Battuta a Qazi in his court, and he remained as a Qazi for several years. But after several years, he fell short in the eyes of the Sultan, and he was thrown into prison. Okay. Then after some time, the misunderstanding between Ibn Battuta and Sultan were cleared, and he again became the Qazi in his court. Okay. And in 1342, he proceeded to China as the Sultan's envoy to the Mongol ruler. Okay, in 1342 he went to China as the Sultan's envoy to the Mongol ruler. From that we can understand that now there is no there is no problem between the Sultan and Morocco, because the Sultan sent Ibn Battuta, a foreigner, to China as Sultan's envoy to the Mongol ruler. Understand? Shall I tell you once more? Ibn Battuta came to India so that he could meet the Sultan, Muhammad bin Tughlaq, because Ibn Battuta has heard that he is a very good patron of arts and letters. He went to Delhi, met the Sultan, they became friends, and the Sultan was clearly impressed with the knowledge of Ibn Battuta, and he made Ibn Battuta a Qazi in his court. He remained Qazi for several years, and after some time there was some misunderstanding between the Sultan and Ibn Battuta, so the Sultan put him in the prison. Then after some time, they overcame the misunderstanding, and he was again made as a Qazi in the court of Muhammad bin Tughlaq. Okay, then what happened is that because the Sultan believed in him, he sent him as a envoy to China to meet the Mongol ruler. Understand? As a diplomatic agent, envoy to the Sultan. Did you understand that much? Okay. Now, when he was sent to China, actually he travelled in a different way, that is, he came to the Malabar coast. Malabar coast, you know that, isn't it? Okay. Then from Malabar he went to Maldives, and he was there for 18 months as a Qazi, and then to Sri Lanka. So when the Sultan sent Ibn Battuta to China, he travelled from Delhi to Malabar, that we are going to study later, okay, to Malabar. Then from there he went to Maldives, and there he stayed there for 18 months as Qazi there, and then from there he went to Sri Lanka. Okay. Then what happened is that after he went to China as the envoy of the Sultan, he again came back to India, visited Bengal and Assam as well. So from all the way from Delhi to Malabar he came, then from there he went to China, then Maldives, then Sri Lanka, and again he came back to India. He visited Bengal as well as Assam. Okay, so he has extensively toured over India. Now you understand that. From there, from India, he went to Sumatra. Okay, and then the Chinese port of Saichung. He travelled extensively in China. Like he travelled in India, he travelled extensively in China. Then he went back to Morocco, his birthplace. Okay, so he came through Central Asia to India, travelled extensively through India. Then he went to Maldives. then from there to Sri Lanka, then to Maldives, then came back to India again, traveled extensively through India, went to Bengal, Assam, then from there he again went to Sumatra, then he went to China again, and then he returned home in 1347. So he came here in 1332, then went back to his own place in 1347. Okay, in between what happened? He traveled extensively through all these places. So his travelogues or his account were always compared with that of the travelogue of Marco Polo, who visited India as well as China from his home base in Venice. So Marco Polo, what was his home base? Venice. He came to China as well as India, like Ibn Battuta. Okay, so his travel accounts were always compared with what? With the travelogues of Marco Polo. Marco Polo's base was Venice. Ibn Battuta's base was Morocco. But their travelogues were always compared with each other. Did you understand this much? I hope you understood. You just need to know that Marco Polo, Ibn Battuta traveled extensively throughout India. Then he went to Sri Lanka, Maldives, China, Sumatra, all these places, and returned back to his own place, that is Morocco, in 1347. Okay. Now, wherever he went, he extensively observed what all things happened there, and he wrote about the culture, the people, beliefs, values, etc. In his book Rihla, he translated into English. This book Rihla was translated into English by Mahdi Hussain. The book Rihla was translated into English by Mahdi Hussain. See, now about the travels of Ibn Battuta, just remember that he was traveling in the 14th century. We did not have train, aeroplane, not even ships at that time, isn't it? Big ships were not there, so he has to travel. Even though he traveled extensively, it was very difficult for him to travel everywhere, because as you know, in India at that time traveling was very difficult, and he suffered a lot during his travels. Okay, it was very hazardous to travel at that time than now. You are well aware of that. Okay. So he has written about the distance also. That is, he recorded that it took 40 days to travel from Multan to Delhi and 50 days to travel from Sindh to Delhi. So we can approximately understand how much traveling he did one day and what was the distance between Sindh and Delhi, Multan and Delhi, etc. See, from Multan to Delhi it took 40 days and from Sindh to Delhi it took 50 days. Okay, and the distance from Daulatabad to Delhi was covered in 40 days, while from Gwalior to Delhi it took only 10 days. Now see the distance. Did you understand? See, from Multan to Delhi he took 40 days, from Sindh to Delhi he took 50 days, then from Daulatabad to Delhi again he took 40 days, but from Gwalior to Delhi it took 10 days, and he was travelling in a caravan or else in a horse. Okay, he was travelling in a caravan or else in a horse. As I told you, travelling was very insecure during that time, and he was attacked by robbers and bandits several times. Sometimes many of the people in his entourage died. That is, he was traveling with other people also, isn't it? Many of the people died because of the attack of bandits and robbers. And Ibn Battuta, he himself was attacked many times and was left to die. But fortunately for him and for us, so that we could read the travelogues, he escaped from all these things. But he extensively written that traveling in India was very difficult at that time, especially at night. It was very difficult, and many a times he was attacked by robbers and bandits, and many of the people along with who came along with him died during those periods. Okay, see, for example, when he was, I told you, from Multan to Delhi, it took 40 days for him to travel, isn't it? So when he was traveling from Multan to Delhi, his caravan was attacked by robbers and bandits, and many of the travelers lost their lives. And only very few were left and they survived, but they were severely wounded. And Ibn Battuta was very young at that time also. Okay, so from his book Rihla, we can understand the distance between different places, as well as about the traveling, about how they traveled from one place to other, and how they were attacked by the robbers and bandits. So from that, what can we understand? Let me ask you that. What can we understand? We can understand that at that time, during that time itself, in 14th century itself, traveling was very difficult, and there were robbers and bandits at that time also. Understand? Now, this is what I told you earlier. I told you that I am going to show you the map. Okay. Now see, routes of Ibn Battuta. I hope you can see this board, isn't it? See, you can see different colors here. That is a red color, green color, violet, yellow, like that. See this red color lines. Can you see this red color lines? Ibn Battuta traveled from 1325 to 27 in these places. See, from Tangier. Where was he born? He was born in Morocco, and the particular place is Tangier, Tangier, from Tangier. Okay, so from Tangier he went to Algiers, then from there he went to Cairo, then he went to Medina, Baghdad, then Tabriz, then Basra, then Shira. See, all these places he travelled between 1325 and 27. Then between 1330 and 32, you can see this green lines. Did you see these green lines? See, he went to Mecca, Aden, Kenya, Mombasa, Kilwa, etc. That is, this entire places he covered between 1330 and 32. See, please don't worry, you don't need to study this map, you just need to understand in which all places this Ibn Battuta travelled. Okay. Between 1332 and 46. See this blue, violet color. Did you see this violet color? He travelled extensively between 1332 and 46. See, from Turkey, he went to Astrakhan, then Iran, Samarkand, then he came to Delhi, our own place. Then he went from Delhi to many places and he came to Calicut. Then from there he went to Sri Lanka. Okay. Then from Ceylon he went to China. So this is what we are going to study. He came to from Turkey, he came all the way to Samarkand. From Samarkand he came to Delhi. From Delhi he came to Calicut. From Calicut he went to Sri Lanka. From Sri Lanka he went to China. Did you understand now what I said earlier? Okay. Now between 1342 and 53, that is this yellow color. Okay. Then what happened? He went to from China he went to, this is where we stop here, isn't it? From China he went all the way to Mali, and at last he reached back his own place in 1353. So he started his journey in 1325 and he reached back in 1353. Did you want me to see this picture? Okay, you can watch and you can understand how extensively Ibn Battuta travelled.